I'm available for a call, but, we're going to talk on our terms. Last night, the President of the United States reached out to schedule a call. I appreciate this opportunity to discuss how we can protect all.
We had a very good conversation. Mark called me today at 10 o'clock. We put out a statement. We had a very, very good talk. He's going through an election.
In a deeply significant and meticulously calculated move that has sent profound and lasting ripples throughout the entire Canadian political, economic, and social landscape, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney has officially announced that Canada will be lifting a substantial and crucial portion of its retaliatory tariffs on a wide array of American goods. Welcome viewers to my channel. If you're new here, please subscribe, like my video, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next update. This landmark decision, which was made public on a recent and highly anticipated Friday afternoon, represents a profound and deliberate shift in Canada's overarching trade policy. The overarching strategic goal of this adjustment is to bring Canada's trade posture into a greater and more harmonious alignment with the established legal and economic framework of the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, USMCA. This vital and foundational trade agreement, a cornerstone of North American commerce, already provides a broad and robust shield against the arbitrary imposition of tariffs for the vast majority of goods that move freely and seamlessly across the border between the two neighboring countries. This policy adjustment marks a clear and conscious pivot away from Canada's previous and long-held position of maintaining punitive tariffs until the United States completely and unconditionally rescinded its own duties on all Canadian imports, a stance that had become increasingly untenable. The Prime Minister's surprise announcement has immediately drawn swift and vocal criticism from several key groups and influential figures within Canada. Prominent politicians from the opposition benches and influential union leaders, who represent a powerful and highly organized segment of the Canadian workforce, have been particularly vocal in their condemnation of the move, characterizing it in no uncertain terms as a shameful act of capitulation to intense and sustained pressure from the United States. These critics argue vehemently that by unilaterally giving up this significant and hard-won leverage, Canada is fundamentally weakening its negotiating position for future trade talks and is sending a clear and dangerous signal to the U.S. that it can impose tariffs on its northern neighbor without facing a sustained, reciprocal, and damaging economic response. However, Prime Minister Carney has staunchly and eloquently defended the policy shift, explaining that Canada is not retreating but is merely matching the U.S. in upholding the core principles and spirit of the USMCA. He emphasized that this action is not a retreat, but rather a pragmatic and strategic step meticulously designed and executed to create a more stable and productive atmosphere for future trade discussions with Washington. Carney also took the opportunity to reiterate that Canada continues to enjoy the most favorable trade relationship with the U.S. of any country in the world, a crucial and often overlooked point that he believes fully validates his administration's forward-thinking approach. The deepening diplomatic and economic rationale. The momentous decision to lift the tariffs was the direct culmination of a high-stakes and urgent phone call between Prime Minister Carney and U.S. President Donald Trump, a conversation that was immediately followed by a whirlwind and emergency meeting with Carney's full cabinet. During their direct and unfiltered conversation, President Trump reportedly made it clear that a mutual and reciprocal lifting of tariffs was a necessary and non-negotiable condition for restarting substantive trade negotiations. This context is of paramount and central importance, especially since the USMCA is scheduled for its first major review in 2026, an event that carries the potential for significant and transformative changes to the entire North American trade landscape. Prime Minister Carney views the agreement not just as a piece of static legislation, but as an indispensable and foundational asset for Canada's long-term economic security, particularly at a time when the U.S. is increasingly and unpredictably using market access as a powerful bargaining chip in its international trade relations. He pointed out that, thanks to the protections and provisions of the USMCA, Over 85% of trade between the two countries remains completely tariff-free, and the average U.S. tariff on Canadian goods is a mere 5.6%, a figure that is the lowest among all of its trading partners. This stark reality underscores the immense economic value of preserving the existing trade framework, a priority that, in Carney's view, outweighs the symbolic value of maintaining the retaliatory duties. Despite the broader de-escalation, Canada will not be dropping all of its retaliatory measures. Prime Minister Carney was specific that duties on key and sensitive sectors, including steel, aluminum, and autos, will remain in effect. These targeted tariffs are in direct and specific response to ongoing U.S. measures, known as 232 tariffs, which are applied for national security reasons and exist entirely outside the USMCA framework. These targeted duties, such as the steep 50% tariff on steel and aluminum imports, are having a significant and damaging impact on Canadian industries and the countless workers who depend on them for their livelihoods. The persistence of these tariffs demonstrates that while Canada seeks a general de-escalation, it is not abandoning its core leverage on these specific, deeply disputed issues. The government has made it clear that a full resolution of these matters requires a separate process and cannot be conflated with the broader efforts to stabilize the trade relationship. The article also provides a broader perspective on the complex global trade landscape, noting that Canada and China are the only two major nations that have consistently and actively retaliated against the Trump administration's aggressive and unpredictable trade war policies. It also recalls that the initial wave of Canadian retaliatory tariffs, which were first implemented by former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, targeted a long and diverse list of American products, including everything from Florida oranges and Kentucky bourbon to clothing and Harley-Davidson motorcycles. This historical context highlights the tit-for-tat nature of the trade dispute and the political pressures that have shaped Canada's response over time. The fact that the Trump administration had already exempted many goods covered by the free trade deal adds a layer of complexity to this ongoing saga, a crucial point that Carney is now leveraging in his de-escalation strategy. The historical actions of both administrations, it seems, have laid the groundwork for the current policy shift. The monumental stakes of North American trade, the ongoing trade tensions, and the looming possibility of a full-scale renegotiation of the USMCA are of monumental and existential importance to both Canada and Mexico, two nations whose economies are deeply intertwined with that of the United States. The United States serves as the preeminent and most critical export market for both countries, with over three-quarters of Canada's exports and more than 80% of Mexico's exports destined for the U.S. The potential for economic disruption and damage is not merely theoretical. It is a real and ever-present threat, especially after U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick publicly stated that the president is absolutely going to renegotiate USMCA. This blunt and unapologetic declaration highlights the underlying instability and deep unpredictability that currently characterizes the trade relationship. It also serves as a stark reminder that even a carefully negotiated deal can be thrown into question by political rhetoric and shifting priorities, forcing allies to constantly adapt and respond. By matching the U.S. on tariff exemptions, Carney is attempting to stabilize a critically important economic relationship and create a more predictable and trustworthy environment for businesses on both sides of the border. He has vehemently denied any suggestion that Canada is appeasing the U.S., framing his decision instead as a necessary and reciprocal action to protect Canada's fundamental economic interests. This framing is a strategic attempt to recontextualize the move from one of weakness to one of prudent strength, emphasizing reciprocity and mutual benefit. He also noted that preparations are already well underway for the upcoming review of the Free Trade Agreement, signaling a proactive and strategic approach to future negotiations rather than a reactive one. This forward-looking stance is intended to reassure Canadian businesses and investors that the government is actively preparing for the future and not simply reacting to present events. The political backlash, however, is a clear and powerful indication of the high stakes involved in this decision. The head of UNIFER, Canada's largest private sector union, described the decision as a walk back that only enables more U.S. aggression, and argued passionately that Canada should not have backed down unless